triangular head of the rattlesnake, and it will do something that actually a lot of snakes do. It will stick up its tail and shake its tail. And if it's in dry grass or leaves, why, it will sound like the rattle of a rattlesnake. So kind of a neat idea. It's mimicking that rattlesnake because a predator wants to go after the venomous rattlesnake.
Very few predators are
Very few.
So it's a really effective strategy in the animal world, but unfortunately that means that sometimes humans actually get gopher snakes and rattlesnakes confused, but we definitely want to keep both of those out there in the wild because again, they're eating all these mice that we don't want to deal with.
Exactly.
Now this is a local snake, but the next one that I'm going to bring out in a moment or two is from a little bit farther away in Africa, and it's an example of a snake that will also lay eggs, but it actually stays with those eggs for a little while to kind of increase the chances of survival. Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, so I'm aware of gopher snake, and that is a snake that is very widespread. You'll see that snake in all types of habitats, from moist to moderately dry to very dry, so arid areas for gopher snakes. So one of our most widespread snakes, our second longest snake in California, can grow up to 8 feet long, that gopher snake. Now we're going to bring out a snake that does not get as long as the gopher snake, but is considerably thicker than the gopher snake. This snake, does anyone recognize it? How about a python, a ball python? Now look at the thickness of that snake, much, much thicker than that gopher snake that I brought out. And again, maybe about 6 feet in length for the females, about 4 feet for the males. Now, that gopher snake laid eggs, as Rachel mentioned, but it leaves those eggs to hatch out on their own. What about the python? Well, it is a type of snake that does lay eggs, but it stays with them and incubates them. Now, wait a minute. What are reptiles? Like snakes and lizards and turtles, are they warm-blooded like us, endothermic, or are they cold-blooded or ectothermic? Oh, I see everyone saying cold-blooded. So they do not produce their own heat. To those cold-blooded, through the blinds right here. What's that coming through? The sun, yes. So they rely on the heat of the sun to warm their bodies up. So wait a minute. How come a ball python, if it does not produce heat, how does it warm its eggs to incubate them? Does anyone have an idea? Go ahead. Oh, it puts them under the sun. It lays them in the nice room. So that's an excellent idea. But you know what she'll do? She'll lay over the top of them. So as the sun warms her, she can warm those eggs. That's an excellent strategy. There's something else she can do. Now, what do we do when we get cold? Do we rub our hands together, put them under our armpits, kind of jog in place a little? Well, I'm sure you've noticed that snakes do not have arms. They don't have legs, but they are one long muscle. So, everyone pretend you're just one long snake. Kind of tense your shoulder muscles like this. Yeah, if you tense those, if you tense your belly muscles, you will get warm. You will produce some heat. All pythons and boas can also have pits, and those, does anyone know what those are for? What do they detect? What about heat? So they detect heat. So pythons and boas and pit vipers like the rattlesnakes, they can move around at night because that is when most of the rodents are also moving around. So extremely good predators with these heat-sensing pits.
Exactly, good way to find your food. But if we think back to that venomous snake we mentioned earlier, that rattlesnake, it's actually an example of, right behind that panel, it's an example of our last form of reproduction when snakes have a form of live birth, which is kind of surprising with a snake to think about that. And it's a little bit tricky because there still is an egg involved. That egg just stays inside of the mother. So the baby snakes will first hatch out of that egg inside of the mother and then hatch out of the mother, which is pretty cool. Now there's a lot of animals that have this strategy, the rattlesnake, as well as some other, I think Debbie has some cool pictures back here of some other local ones, including my very favorite snake in the world, the San Francisco garter snake. Has anybody seen a garter snake before? Yeah, they're pretty common. Often garden snakes because we can find them in the gardens eating slugs and snails. But this particular garter snake is actually one of the most endangered snakes in the world. And you can't find it in San Francisco anymore. It's a little bit of a tricky name. You can only find it down in San Mateo County at a place called Maury Point. But if you were to go out there and find a snake, look for a snake, you're actually helping to support them quite a bit. Because even just showing with your time or your parking fees to these state parks or national parks, you're saying, I support snakes, I'd like to have them out there.
Yeah,